Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Rodney Manzo, head of supply chain intelligence at Sage. Rodney, thanks so much for joining me once again.
Brittany, thank you.
Trump tariff tensions have flared up once again. The 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs was supposed to be lifted this week, but President Trump extended it to August 1st. You and I talked back in May during the first half of the 90-day pause, and at that time, Anvil found companies didn't feel confident in handling tariff supply chain chaos. 2 months later, another pause later, how are companies feeling now about the tariff uncertainty?
Much of the same, actually. And it's really hard to predict when no one knows a true strategy. And you look at some, economic rationale around this, whether it's, protecting national defense, generating revenue, or even just reciprocal tariffs, you never know what's going to happen or who you're going to tariff. So a lot of the supply chain, what we've seen through our State of Supply Chain report, unease, tension. And then what we see now is it's the same thing. When you don't know if it's going to be Malaysia next or Japan, it's really hard to predict, and it's really hard to put a stable supply chain in place that needs to be stable to perform.
And something that we've seen a lot of is President Trump kicking the can down the road when it comes to these reciprocal tariffs, when it comes to his tariff policy. There has been a lot of whiplash. And I can imagine that for a business, for a supplier, that could be really impossible to try to plan around. So is this extension, is that welcome from businesses? Is that welcome from suppliers? Or are they just thinking, this is more of a headache?
It's way more of a headache for sure. And let me give you an example. One of the companies we work with, they do baby formula, and they produce out of Europe. Obviously, months ago, Europe was on the radar. So what they did is this lull, they just shipped a lot of their goods, and they have a lot of inventory on hand in the US. The problem with that, it's a working capital issue. So their costs are now increasing from holding inventory. So it's a problem because they don't know what to do or how to react, because a month from now, you could see another tariff in Europe.
And I can imagine that's hard because there's so many different percentages that President Trump and the Trump administration is throwing at different countries. So I'm sure companies and suppliers are doing a lot of math trying to say, okay, this country has X percent of tariffs, this country has Y percent of tariffs. President Trump said this time, no more extensions. But it's almost like a boy who cried wolf situation here, where he said this is it, this is final, and then there's been more extensions. And according to a Forbes report, Forbes has been tracking this, and he has flip-flopped since Liberation Day over 24 times when it comes to his tariff policy. This time around, do suppliers think it's going to stick? How really are they preparing for this moment?
The pulse we get is there's unknown. And no one's really reassured that any words are actually going to be reality. And you're looking at it like, a lot of our partners, Canada, 35% tariffs. You look at like 50% for Brazilian goods and for copper and other things. You're like, well, how do these numbers come about? And even lower, countries that have a negative import, we're tariffing them, meaning that they're bringing in more goods than they're actually pushing out. So it's no one knows what's going to happen. And the strategy is really, really not a strategy because it's just numbers that blankly get thrown on the wall.
And what does all of that mean? To that point of numbers getting blankly thrown at the wall, countries have different percentages now of tariffs. So are companies looking at this and saying, hey, I want to work more closely, perhaps I want to move the supply chain a little bit to a different country that perhaps has a lower rate? What does that really look like right now?
Yeah, so what we see is how business are reacting. And there's a few things. Number one, they're reassessing their entire supply chains, and they continue to do that throughout the year, trying to understand if they have a good source or a bad source, a good location or a bad location. While they're reassessing, they're doing the second thing. They're diversifying their supply chain, securing costs, securing contracts, making sure that they have stability in this very unstable time. And lastly, they continue to explore reshoring. Should you bring back things here in the US? Not all companies, not all industries or verticals can, but they're doing those things. And lastly, what they're doing, I think more than ever, they're looking at visibility across that first mile because that's really where you're getting hit from sourcing to inventory management or production to incoming goods. They're trying to invest in technology. They're trying to automate communication, collaboration, making sure they're more seamless and they have real-time feeds going on so they can quickly react and adapt to this uncertain time with tariffs.
And when it comes to tariffs, economists have said a tariff is a tax on the consumer. I'm thinking about the consumers right now, especially when businesses, as you're saying, they're facing unease. They feel unease. They feel this uncertainty. There's a lot of unknowns right now. When will the consumer really feel the brunt of that?
Yeah, so I look at this in two questions that I continue to ask myself. Do tariffs ultimately help? And what about this for me? So if I'm looking at do they ultimately help? Are they going to protect domestic industries short term? Maybe. Maybe they do. Do they help with inflation? Maybe. Do they help with bottlenecks? Definitely not. And what's the retaliatory measures here that are going to be taking place? So when I look at those things, I don't see them actually helping. I see them counter to each of those points that we want. Increasing inflation, creating supply chain bottlenecks, hurting domestic industries, and really short term, long term, it's not helpful. So for me, for you, when we're going in the store, I think we'll face higher prices. We're already seeing that. We're just looking at Amazon Prime. We're talking about that right before this. Prime Day is not what it has been in years past. Well, why? Consumers have less money, things cost more, so they're not buying as much. But you see it across in different verticals and industries, you see this more. Electronics. If you need a new MacBook, it's going to be more expensive. Vehicles, way more money than you would in the past. And even copper could be hit. So for the consumer at the end of the day, these tariffs are not helpful. They're not helping you or me. They're increasing what we're spending on products.
And to that point, it's Amazon Prime Day right now. I'm thinking about November. I'm thinking about Black Friday. I'm thinking about the holiday season come November and December. We're even closer to the holiday season right now than we were back in May when we were talking. And 2 months ago, you said businesses really face two choices right now. One was, do I order too much right now and have an overstock, or do I not order enough right now and perhaps I don't meet my margins come the end of the year? Where are they right now when it comes to holiday season shopping and buying?
So there's different camps of brands and companies and different strategies. The companies that delayed and they're producing in Japan or Malaysia and these countries, they're being hit now because their hand is forced. You need to ship goods to get them into your warehouse or distribution center for the holidays. It takes 30 to 45 days via ocean to get them to wherever they need to go. If you don't have them on hand, you're not going to be able to sell them. The other companies that put the strategy in place, let's move ahead, let's avoid these, they have a benefit. And I don't know the cost difference between a 20 or 50% tariff with the holding cost per se, but chances are the ones that reacted quick and avoided those tariffs are actually making more money and they prevented themselves from getting that tariff tax.
And so, if I'm a company right now and I know that President Trump said August 1st, that's the drop dead date, that's when these reciprocal tariffs will go into effect. If I'm a top executive here, do I believe that? And how do I strategize right now in almost mid July about that August 1st date?
You have to believe it. And the reason for that is you can't plan not to believe it. The repercussions of that is just counter to what you would need to be as an executive in a company or operator at a brand. And if you don't have one, two, three, four different contingency plans in place, you're going to fail and your business is going to under. I think we're seeing that for the SMBs, the smaller companies. They can't react quick enough. They don't have the money, the capital, the resources to actually do something. It's hurting them. Bigger companies, they'll just take a hit. They'll lose margin, maybe increase costs for us and the consumers, but there's all different strategies and you have to deploy multiple now. And if you look at 10 years ago, when I was, at Harry's or even, close to 15, 20 years ago when I was at Apple, we never had to worry about any of this. It was stable. We never made any changes. We never had to adapt. The contingency models, the risk models were not in place. Now today, every business is doing that.
And so, as the supply chain expert here, as someone who's been there when you didn't have to make these contingency plans, when it was smooth sailing, now it's exactly the opposite. I mean, what is the best way for businesses to go forward?
Yeah. So the same thing in the past, and I think anyone listening to this would be just amazed that most of the global supply chain is run on an Excel spreadsheet, pen and paper, email, phone call, or someone just going around the world and shaking hands. That process and that way to manage the supply chain is just not what happens nowadays. Agentic AI, intelligent software that connects and orchestrates an ecosystem, that's what they're putting in place and that's what they're looking at now. They have to produce the feeling, the gut of a human and replace it with actually technology that can see around the corner. So we're seeing a lot of that. The second thing that we're seeing is true diversification. If you always just worked for 20, 30, 40 years, that one supplier in the one location, you are not doing that anymore. You're diversifying that supplier, whether it's forcing that supplier to have multiple locations, so you still work with the same supplier, or you're diversifying outside of that supplier and having multiple suppliers in your ecosystem. So those two things are working in parallel nowadays.
Aside from looking at President Trump's social media accounts and seeing what his latest tariff announcement is, what specifically are you looking out for between now and August 1st? Because the White House said, we're still working on deals. Deals could be made right now. They're sending letters, they said, to other countries saying, this is the deal. This is what the tariff rate is going to be. What are some signposts you're specifically looking out for?
I'm looking at the legal landscape. Number one is what's happening here. Are these going to hold true? Are the courts that are scrutinizing these policies and the practices, are they going to allow them to continue? Because for me, that's a major way to get around this. The second thing I'm looking at, what are our allies? What are these countries that are actually getting these tariffs doing? Is it reciprocal? What actions are happening? And then lastly, I'm picking up the phone, I'm calling my suppliers. And I'm trying to get closer to them and trying to understand what strategies and policies they have in place. Are they going to eat some of this cost for me? Are they looking at moving their supply chains to different locations? So those are the three, I think, things I'm looking at and doing to try to help combat like tariffs now, and also the unknown with tariffs.
And to that point, would suppliers eat some of this cost? What is the benefit for them there? And how much of a loss is that? And how much are they going to eat before they pass it on to you or me?
It depends, right? It very much depends. So where I look at this, high margin industries have a lot of room to go and they can cut into their margins and keep their customers and keep them happy. Because the alternative for these suppliers is to lose your customer, which then you'll have zero. So they're looking at that. So if you look at electronics or even auto and other industries, they'll come down. But others where they just can't, like health, beauty, and wellness, food and bev, where maybe the margins are a little bit lower, they can't actually do anything for you, which is very unfortunate because you could be the world's best supplier, again, for someone that's been with them for 20 plus years, and you may not be able to do anything to retain the business, which is pretty unfortunate on both sides.
And to end the conversation, I want to circle back to the beginning because the sentiment here is while 2 months have passed since you and I have talked, it's been 3 months since Liberation Day. A lot has changed, but a lot has stayed the same. Are businesses right now, from when you and I talked, are they feeling better, worse, or exactly the same?
That's a great question. And I would look at it on a couple lenses. The first lens are the companies that were able to adapt and for whatever reason, they were able to not hit the lottery of tariffs and they prevented their supply chain from, moving to whether Canada or Japan or Malaysia or any country that was hit. They're feeling great. They feel like they made the right moves, even though it was pure luck. It was a lottery move. They made the right moves. The others that are now being hit that did do these moves, try to move away from China, try to move from other countries, do the right thing that are now getting hit, they're questioning things and they feel way worse. And every individual or every company has a different strategy, different approach for good reasons. But it's really hard to put strategies in place when you don't know what's next.
I think that's the big question, the what's next. And as you and I sit here right now, what's next seems to be that August 1st date. But I hope you and I talk around August 1st, either perhaps August 1st or right after, and see where we are then. Rodney Manzo, thank you so much for the conversation.
Brittany, thank you so much.